For centuries, we've been told the Great Pyramid of Giza was just a tomb, built 4,500 years ago by a powerful pharaoh. Is this true, or is there more to the story? This monument isn't just massive, it's mathematically perfect. It encodes pi, the golden ratio, and even e, numbers we supposedly discovered thousands of years later. It aligns precisely with the cardinal points, reflects the proportions of the Earth, and echoes Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. So, was this just a burial site, or are we looking at something far more advanced, something humanity may have forgotten? Buckle up. In today's video, we're diving into one of the greatest mysteries of ancient world. Before we get into all of that, let's do a quick overview of the region. We find ourselves in the southern eastern hemisphere of Africa, especially in Egypt, situated between the western deserts to the west and the Nile River to the east. And just south of the capital, Cairo, lies the Giza Plateau. Here we find three main pyramids, a few smaller pyramids, the Valley Temple, and of course the Sphinx. The main pyramid, also known as Khufu's pyramid, originally stood at a height of 481 feet, 150 meters, with a massive base of 555 feet, 230 meters. It is said to consist of around 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing on average an average of 2.5 tons, with some blocks reaching up to 15 tons. There is believed to be 144 casing stones, note that number, which cover the entire pyramid, polished to make it extremely smooth. These were made from a specific type of limestone called Tura limestone. The pyramid is estimated to weigh around 6 million tons. The exterior and interior are connected by a descending corridor that goes all the way down beneath the bedrock, ending in a so-called subterranean chamber. Before reaching that, an ascending corridor branches off from the descending one. This corridor leads up to the grand gallery, an immense opening compared to the otherwise narrow passageways. Before ascending the gallery, a turn to the left leads to the Queen's Chamber. This chamber measures 17.2 feet by 18.9 feet by 20 feet, 5.2 by 5.8 by 6.3 meters. Two shafts were discovered in the north and south walls. In one, a ball of diorite, and in the other, a piece of wood dated to 3300 BC were found. In the other, a robot explored the shaft and found it ended in a kind of door with metal handles. Continuing up the grand gallery, we finally reach the king's chamber. This room measures 34.4 by 17.2 by 19 feet, or 10.5, 5.2, and 5.8 meters. Inside is a sarcophagus made of red granite. In fact, the entire chamber is constructed from granite. Above it are what Egyptologists call the relieving chambers, consisting of around 5 massive granite blocks weighing between 50 and 80 tons each. There are also two shafts that extend from the chamber all the way to the exterior of the pyramid. The second pyramid, also called Khafre's pyramid, is the second largest and tallest, with a height of 448 feet, 136.4 meters, and a base length of 706 feet, 215.5 meters. It sits on a 10 meters of bedrock, which can make it appear taller in some images. The stones at the base are very large, but as the pyramid rises, the stones become progressively smaller, tapering to just 50 centimeters or 20 inches. Thick at the apex, the bottom course of the casing stones was made of pink granites, but the remainder was covered in Tora limestone. Khafre's pyramid was one chamber connected by two different passageways, which is the same length as the chamber in Khufu's pyramid and also contains a granite sarcophagus. The third pyramid, the smallest of the three, originally stood at 215 feet, 65.5 meters, tall with a base length of 356 feet or 108.5 meters. It was constructed from limestone and red granite. Its internal structure, much like Khafre's, consists of one large chamber with a basalt sarcophagus. Probably the second most famous monument at Giza is the Sphinx. It was directly carved out of the limestone bedrock and measures 240 feet long by 60 feet wide and 62 feet high. It also contains multiple hidden chambers, one at the top of its head, one near its rump, one in its chest, and several smaller ones. Finally, we have the Valley Temple, made up of hundreds of massive blocks of pink Aswan granite arranged in precise geometric patterns. Okay, here's where things get interesting. Egyptologists claim that the entire Giza Plateau complex was built by the pharaohs during the 4th dynasty. The Great Pyramid itself is said to have been built by Khufu in just 27 years. Wikipedia cites three main reasons for its construction. One, as a tomb for Khufu, two, to demonstrate status, and three, as a place for offerings. The first attribution of the Great Pyramid to Khufu came around 500 BC from Herodotus after speaking with Egyptian priests. He claimed that the pyramid was built by 100,000 laborers over 20 years. Today, experts say it was built by far fewer people, around 17,000 skilled workers. To cut the stones, Egyptologists had arsenic copper chisels, saws, wooden mallets, and rope. These are the only types of tools found from that era. Experts say that they used long saws and, with the help of water and sand, cut through more than 2 million stones. For transportation, they supposedly used rollers made of logs dragging the stones with ropes. To get the stones up the pyramid, multiple theories exist. Some suggest ramps perpendicular to the pyramid's face. Others argue this would require more material than the pyramid itself. Another theory proposes a ramp spiraling up the pyramid sides. Egyptologists note problems with this idea. It would be hard, if not impossible, to move stones around corners, and the top couldn't be completed due to lack of space. Plus, the mud brick ramp would consistently need repairs from the wear and tear of transporting such massive stones. A more advanced theory suggests building a straight ramp up to the 50th course, two-thirds of the blocks, and then using a spiral ramp for the rest. Of course, the spiral ramp faces the same issues as before. The same study claims that 13,000 workers could build the pyramid in 10 years, 2 to 3 years of preparation, 5 years of construction, and 2 years for ramp removal. This proposed ramp could be 1,000 feet would would be 1,000 feet long, 305 meters, with a gradient of 15%, an angle of 8.53 degrees, reaching 175 feet high, 53 meters. However, there's a small problem. If you calculate it, 1,000 feet ramp at the 8.53-degree angle only reaches about 148.5 feet, or 45 meters. Moving on. This study claims the workers would work 24 days per month, with each day consisting of 5 hours in the morning and the same in the afternoon. 280 working days per year. They estimate that it would take 2 man days or 20 hours to cut stone. Important to remember. It also states that 20 men are needed to pull a sled up the ramp, taking 4 hours to do so. Their conclusion? 131,200 man years, or 10 years with 13,200 men. How did they get that number? Honestly, it's unclear. Taking their numbers, 2 million blocks, 10 man days to move one block, 2 man days to cut it, divide by their 280 working days gives us around 143,000 man years. And that doesn't even include the rocks that came up the Nile. National Geographic states that for each inch of limestone cut, a quarter inch of copper is lost. They say the copper came from the southern Sinai Peninsula and claim, and I quote, the most efficient way to access these mines was by boat. Really? up the Nile into the Mediterranean, around Africa, and back up to the Red Sea? Well, to be fair, they did have a port on the Red Sea, but it's still 100 miles, 160 kilometers from Giza, and they would also have to cross the Nile. Back to the copper. If 4 inches of limestone are cut uses up to 1 inch of copper, and the average block has a surface area of 62.4 square feet, 8,985.6 square inches, and assuming that both sides are cuts, that's around 4,400 square inches per block. This means 1,100 square inches of copper per block. Multiply that by 2.3 million blocks, and you get about 2.5 billion square inches of copper, or 17,000 square feet, roughly 3.6 basketball courts. The only document mentioning the construction is a papyrus found at Wadi el Jafra, called the Diary of Mir. It appears to be a logbook detailing the activities of a boat bringing stone to the Giza Plateau, and mentions Khufu's name, but it never specifies what the blocks were for. To sum up, the mainstream says the pyramids were built as tombs for the pharaohs. The blocks were cut with copper tools, transported by boats or rollers, and hauled up ramps to the pyramids. Now, the debunking begins. Let's start this off clearly. There are 0 ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs depicting the construction process of the pyramids of Giza. Moreover, no known 4th dynasty hieroglyphs or visual records show workers carving stone. And the Egyptians were meticulous. They wrote down everything, detailing each of their pharaohs going back thousands of years. One other thing I didn't mention earlier, there are around 400 granite stones in the Great Pyramid and about 1,000 more in the 2 other pyramids. These granite blocks, quarried 560 miles, 900 kilometers south, weigh up to 80 tons each. Here's the problem. Granite is extremely hard. Egyptologists claim these blocks were cut using giant copper saws with no teeth combined with sand and water. But there's a catch. Even with this method, it would take 1 hour to cut 2 millimeters, 0.07 inches. To cut 1 meter, about 3.3 feet, it would take 21 days. And that's only one side of the rock. Multiply by 6 sides, and you're looking at 120 days, nearly literally half a year's work for a block. And we've never found a single one of these supposed thoughts. You would think that we could find at least one with the number that would be needed in the construction of all 3 of the pyramids. According to the mainstream study, in order to meet their timeline, workers would have needed to lay 4 blocks per minute. But this pyramid isn't a random jumble of rocks. It's an engineering masterpiece. The casing stones and interior blocks fit together with joints averaging just 0.5 millimeters, 0.02 inches. You can't even slip a fingernail between them, and some seams aren't even visible to a camera. The base of the pyramid forms a square with an error of just 2.3 inches, 58 millimeters over 755 feet. The 4 corners of the pyramids are perfectly square with an error of just 12 arc seconds. To clarify, take 1 degree of a circle, divide it by 60, you get an arc minute. Divide that by 60 again, you get an arc second. Now let me repeat. The 4 corners of the pyramid are perfectly square with an error of just 12 arc seconds. Pretty crazy. The pyramid's platform is leveled with a deviation of just 21 millimeters, 0.8 inches, over an area of 13 acres, 53,000 square meters. That's better leveling than modern standard lasers. And the pyramid is aligned to the four cardinal directions with a precision of 0.06 degrees. But it keeps going. On a structure this scale, even a tiny error at the base would create an immense deviation at the top, but that didn't happen. So the question is, why? Why would the Egyptians make the pyramid so precise if it was only a tomb? It makes no sense. The immense effort to achieve such precision suggests the builders had a powerful reason for demanding such exact measurements. This brings us to the main question. Were the pyramids actually tombs? Did we find mummies in any of the three pyramids? Nope. Egyptologists claim they were looted and stripped in antiquity. But here's a story for you. In the 9th century AD, Caliph al-Mamun was the first to break into the Great Pyramid. He tunneled into the north face and, by sheer luck, intersected the descending passage as he explored. Another lucky break occurred. Vibrations from his diggings had dislodged a limestone block that concealed the ascending passage. But his team couldn't cut through the remaining granite plugs, so they worked around them and accessed the ascending passage. They went all the way to the king's chamber expecting a treasure trove, but when they arrived, it was completely empty. No jewelry, no mummy, no pottery, nothing. You might think someone else got there first, but those massive stone plugs make that very, very unlikely. No one could have entered before them. The only other way into the king's chamber is a tiny shaft less than 2 feet in diameter. It's clear the sarcophagus never held a mummy. And there's more. There are zero hieroglyphs inside the entire Great Pyramid and the other two pyramids at Giza. You think that if you built the largest monument for millennia, you'd document who did it and how. Actually, sorry, I lied. We did find one hieroglyph. In 1837, Howard Weiss discovered graffiti in the fourth and fifth relieving chambers. Miraculously, it named Khufu a dozen times. Egyptologists jumped on it, claiming it proved Khufu built the pyramid, but the discovery is suspicious. Weiss was running out of money and desperate for a find. Plus, why would builders put inscription in the fourth relieving chamber? Just one chamber above the third which had already been discovered. The hieroglyphs themselves are strange. Some are upside down, with spelling and grammatical errors. Additionally, there is also a stone tablet called the Inventory Stela, which states that the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx already existed before Khufu. Egyptologists analyzed the stela's writing style and concluded it was written 1,500 years after Khufu's reign, dismissing it as historical fiction just as fast as they had embraced the Howard Weiss's discovery, without even thinking that the stela could be based on a much older inscription from the 4th dynasty. In every other pyramid where pharaohs have actually been buried and found, hieroglyphs are everywhere. Why none here? It's not like hieroglyphs weren't common in the 4th dynasty, they were thriving. Wikipedia casually dismisses this by saying, well, they just didn't do that in this pyramid. Another fascinating point, if you look at the pyramids from the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and then 6th dynasty, you notice something strange. The pyramids start out simple in the 3rd dynasty, improve drastically to masterpieces like the Giza pyramids in the 4th, and then decline back to lower quality in later dynasties. John Anthony West, whom we'll discuss more later, compared this to the auto industry inventing and building the Model T Ford, suddenly leaping to make the 1993 911 Porsche, and then forgetting how to do that, going back to building Model Ts again. Civilizations just don't work like that. One final point raised by Graham Hancock, journalist and author of Fingerprints of the Gods, is why would you build a massive monument to announce to the world that you're buried there if you don't want to be disturbed after death? Oh, and by the way, an ostrich egg, the tomb dated to 7000 BC, shows a drawing of three pyramids to the left of what clearly resembles the Nile River. To sum it up, Graham Hancock's words. The close association observed between the three Great Pyramids and three Fourth Dynasty pharaohs could indeed have been because these pharaohs built the pyramids as their tombs, but it could also have come about if the gigantic monuments of the Giza Plateau had been standing long before the dawn of historical civilization known as dynastic Egypt. In that case, it was only necessary to assume that Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure came along later and built a number of subsidiary structures around the older pyramids. Now the fun really begins, because this is where you see that the pyramids were trying to send us a message, not a message in an obscure language, but in the universal language of mathematics. Let's start simple. The Great Pyramid is located almost exactly in the center of all the landmass on the Earth. Coincidence? Maybe. But it's also positioned at a latitude of 29 degrees, 58 arc minutes, 45 arc seconds. Basically at 30 degrees latitude. It gets even closer when you take atmospheric refraction into account, which would place 30 degrees latitude at 29 degrees 58 arc minutes 22 arc seconds. To calculate latitude, as you must know, you need to know the dimensions of the Earth. You might think I'm crazy, but stay with me. By the way, the pyramids is off by only 2,000 feet from 30 degrees latitude, 600 meters. Moving on. When Napoleon visited the pyramid in July 1789, he brought a team of scientists tasked with mapping the area and studying the pyramid. They discovered two fascinating facts. First, if you drew a line going north through the apex of the pyramid, it perfectly splits the Nile Delta in half. Second, if you draw two straight lines from the apex to the two northern corners, east and west, and then extend them, they perfectly frame the two sides of the Nile Delta. Now, let's talk about the king's chamber. The sarcophagus inside is actually 1 inch too wide to have been carried into the room. It had to have been placed there during construction. Remarkably, the sarcophagus's internal volume is exactly 1,166.4 liters, exactly half of the external volume of 2,332.8 liters. Philander Petrie, an Egyptologist, examined this and concluded it must have been cut from the surrounding granite with copper saws 8 feet long, tipped with diamond cutting points. To hollow it out, he said it would have required circular saws tipped with diamonds as well. The sheer pressure and precision needed was astonishing, likely around 1 to 2 tons of pressure on the 4-inch drills cutting into granite. The king's chamber itself is built on the 50th course masonry. Petrie made some fascinating observation about its placement. At the level where the vertical section of the pyramid was halved, where the area of the horizontal section was half that of the base, where the diagonal from the corner to corner was equal to the length of the base, and where the width of the face was equal to half of the diagonal of the base. This is a feat of incredible mathematical engineering. Moving on. You've probably heard of pi, the irrational number defining the ratio of the circle's circumference to its diameter. Well, it shows up in the pyramid too. If you take the original base length of the pyramid, 755.85 feet, and divide it by twice by half the height, 481 feet, you get 3.14282. Pi is 3.14159, etc. This is 99.96% accurate. Pretty crazy, considering pi was supposedly discovered around 1000 BC and not with this level of accuracy. Next, the golden ratio, another irrational number found everywhere in nature. If you split one face of the pyramid to form two right angled triangles and set the base of one of those triangles to 1, the hypotenuse, the longest side, the diagonal, is equal to the golden ratio. Using Pythagorean's theorem and doing the math, you'll find the answer is equal to 1.61859. The golden ratio is 1.16803, a 99.97% accuracy. The first time it was calculated to this precision in recorded history was in, wait for it, the 16th century. You might have heard of the mathematical problem of squaring the circle, matching the circumference of the circle to the perimeter of a square. Today, it's been proven impossible to do perfectly. However, the perimeter of the pyramid's base is equal to 3,023.139 feet. If you take the pyramid's height, 481 feet, as the radius of a circle, you get a circumference of 3,022.212 feet. Compare that to the perimeter of the pyramid's base, and that is squaring the circle with an accuracy of 99.97%. And let me remind you, it is impossible to get it 100%. Moving on. Remember 144,000 casing stones? Well, that number reoccurs everywhere. There is 1,440 minutes in a day, 1,440 degrees in the angles of an octahedron, or two pyramids base to base, 144 square inches in the square foot. And in the Bible's Revelation 7:4 and 14:1, 144 is a sacred number. Here's where it gets really wild. If I told you the pyramid is a 1 to 43,200 scale model of the northern hemisphere, would you believe me? Well, it's true. There are two ways to measure the pyramid, without the socle and with it. The height is 482.7575 feet, and the base length is 760.9 feet with the socle. The perimeter then becomes 3,043.433 feet. The Earth's equatorial circumference is exactly 131,479,713 feet. All right, take that number and divide it by 43,200, and you get 3,043.51 feet. Now, I don't know if you remember what I just told you. The perimeter of the pyramid with the socle is 3,043.433 feet. That is 99.997% accuracy. All right, now, similarly, Earth's polar radius is 20,855,485.6 feet. Now, divide that by the same number, 43,200, and you get 482.7658 feet. Now, do you remember the heights of the pyramid? 482.7575 feet with the socle. That is 99.998% accurate. This implies the builders knew Earth's exact dimensions, knowledge we only confirmed with satellites in 1972. But you might be asking, why a ratio of 43,200? Is that a random number? Well, it's not. It's everywhere. The sun's radius is 432,000 miles. There are 43,200 seconds in half a day. 432 hertz is a sacred frequency. The moon's diameter is 2,160 meters. Multiply that by 20 and you get 43,200. If you guys have any other examples, share them in the comments down below. Plus, it's intimately tied to Earth's axial precession. More about that later in the video. Now, if you're still skeptical, here are two more facts. One pretty simple, the other mind-boggling. First, in half a second, the Earth's equator rotates the same distance as the pyramid's base length. In half a second, the Earth's equator rotates the same distance as the pyramid's base in length, 760.5 feet, only 0.4 feet off. Alright, buckle in for this one. Second, as you might know, Earth isn't a perfect sphere. It bulges at the equator due to its rotation. Now, the difference between the equatorial and the polar radius is about 13 miles. If you zoom in on the intersection of a 1 degree latitude, 1 degree longitude at the equator, you get a rectangle because of the difference of the distances with sides 68.7031 miles longitude and 69.171 miles latitude. Make this rectangle an arc minute, so divide both sides by 60, and you get 6,045.881 feet longitude and 6,087.0941 feet latitude. Now again, divide both these by 2 and you get 3,022.94 feet, again longitude, and 3,043.547 feet. Now, these numbers match exactly the pyramid's base with the socle and without the socle with a precision over 99.99%. You can do the calculations by yourself if you want. This means that the pyramid's two base perimeters measurements are a 1 to 120 scale of the 1 degree latitude and 1 degree longitude distances at Earth's equator. This is mind-blowing. If you are still not convinced now that the pyramid builders possessed incredibly advanced knowledge of our planet, I don't know what will convince you. I've already laid more than around 20 minutes of evidence showing these structures weren't built in 2500 BC, but now I will show you two different discoveries dating their construction to around 10,500 BC. You might already have heard of the first theory or discovery. It's the water erosion theory. Many monuments, like the Valley Temple and the Sphinx itself, are marked by deep signs of water erosion. The Sphinx was traditionally attributed to a time long before the Egyptians, up until the 20th century when Egyptologists abruptly changed their stance. Today, Egyptologists attribute the Sphinx to Khafre for 3 reasons. First, they found Khafre's emblem on the Sphinx stela, an epigraphic stela erected between the front paws of the Great Sphinx of Giza by Pharaoh Thutmose IV around 1401 BC during the 18th dynasty. Second, because the Valley Temple is next to it. And third, because the face is said to resemble Khafre's statue. Now let's unpack this. First, Frank Domingo, a forensic artist with the New York Police Department, conducted a meticulous scan of both the statue of Khafre and the face of the Sphinx. He concluded that the Sphinx in no way represented Khafre. Now, secondly, the only reason this valley temple is attributed to Khafre is that his statue was found there. But that doesn't prove he built it. I could go into detail about the incredible engineering of the Valley Temple, but suffice to say, finding a statue in a temple doesn't mean the temple belongs to that person. Now, lastly, the cartouche that was found, discovered by Egyptologist Gaston Maspero, was said by Maspero to actually be an indication of renovation or clearance of the Sphinx. This makes sense because the Sphinx is built in a ditch which completely fills up with sand in less than 50 years. Plus, that cartouche was inscribed 1,000 years after Khafre's reign. Back to the discovery. John Anthony West argued that these monuments showed clear signs of having been weathered by water, which would mean the Sphinx must have been built at least around 10,450 BC. Today, the Giza Plateau is a desert, but it hasn't always been that way. Between around 14,000 and 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a humid and green place. After that, rainfall dropped from 50 centimeters per year to just 5. These water erosions couldn't have formed if the Sphinx was built 4,500 years ago. West presented his evidence at the 1992 annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Mark Lenner, the director of the Giza Mapping Project, was there and couldn't refute West's findings. His only rebuttal was that if it was built in 10,000 BC, we should have found more evidence of that civilization. By the way, it couldn't have been wind erosion because of the patterns of erosion and because the Sphinx had been buried for more than 3,000 years. Plus, why would you build something in a hole if you're in a desert full of sand? It makes no sense. The Sphinx must have been made in a time before the Sahara became a desert. Another interesting fact, the Sphinx faces exactly east, meaning it aligns with the rising sun on the vernal and autumnal equinoxes. This ties into a fascinating aspect of Earth's rotation. In school, we're taught that the Earth has two movements. It rotates on its axis and revolves around the sun. But it actually has a third movement called axial precession. As you know, Earth is tilted on its axis, but this tilt slowly wobbles in a circle, completing a full cycle every 25,920 years. This precession causes the sunrise at the vernal equinox to migrate along the zodiac band, with different constellations appearing behind the sun every 2,160 years. There are exactly 12 zodiac signs the sun rises in front of during this around 26,000 year cycle. Now, this might seem random, but it was extremely important to nearly every ancient civilization. Let's recap. The Sphinx faces due east, aligning with the rising sun on the equinox, making it an equinoctial marker. Each zodiac sign has its own symbolic representation. Aries is the ram, Taurus the bull. If the Sphinx had been carved by Khafre, it would have been in the form of a bull, because Khafre lived during the age of Taurus. But, as we all know, the Sphinx is a lion. Now, do you know which zodiac sign is represented by a lion? Leo, of course. And when was the age of Leo? Well, it lasted from about 10,750 BC to 8,600 BC. That matches perfectly with the water erosion evidence on the Sphinx. Coincidence? Well, at this point, it seems less and less likely. But there's more. I present to you the Orion's Belt theory. This discovery began with when two Egyptologists realized that the king's southern shaft pointed toward the lowest star in the Orion constellation around 2450 BC, about 100 years after the supposed construction of the pyramid, but still close enough that Egyptologists didn't worry too much. About 20 years later, Robert Bauval came along, verified their discovery, and then found that the Queen's shaft points towards the star Sirius at around the same date. But one night, while looking up at the sky, Bauval noticed something intriguing about the Orion constellation. In an interview with Graham Hancock, he said, they are slanted along a diagonal in the southern-westerly direction relative to the axis of the Milky Way, and the pyramids are slanted in a southern-westerly direction relative to the axis of the Nile. He took a closer look at the third star, Mintaka, and saw that it's slightly offset to the east of the main diagonal formed by the other two stars. This pattern is perfectly mimicked on the ground, where the pyramid of Menkaure is offset by exactly the right amounts. What they did at Giza, Movo said, was build Orion's belts on the ground. At first, this was just an observation, but Bauval then used a powerful computer program called Skyglobe to map the stars over any place at any time. As he had noticed, there's still a correlation today between Orion's belt and the three pyramids, and this doesn't change much over time. But the only date when the match is perfect is, wait for it, around 10,450 BC. Pretty crazy, right? And guess what? That's also when the Orion constellation was at its lowest point in the night sky, crossing the meridian at 11 degrees 8 arc minutes, whereas today it crosses around 50 degrees. Why do stars' altitude change over time? Well, it's because of axial precession again, which also affects the declination of stars in the night sky slowly but surely. This combination, the pyramids representing Orion's belt on the ground, and the fact that when they were built, the stars were at their lowest altitude, suggests that the layout of the pyramid is a snapshot of a specific time in history when the Orion constellation was beginning in its rise again. Egyptologists, of course, say this is all just a coincidence. But Bauval has a theory that ties the king's and queen's shaft into the bigger picture. He suggests that an ancient advanced civilization laid out the blueprints of the Giza Plateau around 10,500 BC. They started building, but never fully finished. That might explain why Khafre's pyramid starts with massive limestone blocks at the base and then abruptly switches to smaller, less perfect blocks. This is, of course, just a theory like any other. Bauval ended with a magnificent quote that I have to share because it is so true. Even if the driver is no longer at the wheel, the Giza necropolis is still a machine that was designed to provoke questions. Look at its power. 5,000 years on, it still gets you. It forces you into a process of thinking. The minute you've asked a question about engineering. You've asked a question about geometry. You asked a question about astronomy. So it forces you to learn about engineering and geometry and astronomy, and gradually you begin to realize how sophisticated it is, how incredibly clever and skillful and knowledgeable its builders must have been. Powerful, isn't it? And true too. I've learned so much in the making of this video, and I hope you have as well. But this is just the beginning. We've only just proven that the mainstream theory is most likely false, and that the Giza complex was built, or at least planned, 12,500 years ago. But we haven't yet answered the most important questions. Who built them, and why? Subscribe so you don't miss the next video.